2 students were praying for their swift recovery. There's an article here from Colorado Public Radio. The title is, quote, FBI was already investigating an account that may have been linked to the Evergreen shooter. You're familiar with the circumstances, generally, Director, regarding this terrible tragedy.
Yes.
So my understanding from the public reporting is that an organization reported to the FBI in July of this year regarding, just reading here from the article, that the FBI opened an assessment into a social media account user whose identity was unknown and who was discussing the planning of a mass shooting with threats nonspecific in nature. This is the FBI statement to the press. And that the FBI continued to work this assessment investigation to identify the name and location of the user up until September 10th, 2025, which was the day of the tragedy. Can you provide us some clarity on what were the impediments to finding, the account user?
A congressional hearing meant to examine public safety concerns took an unexpected turn today when Congressman Joe Neguse of Colorado pressed FBI Director Kash Patel on 2 deeply sensitive issues: the Bureau's handling of a school shooting investigation in his district and Patel's personal financial investments while leading the nation's top law enforcement agency. If you want coverage that explains not just what happened, but why it matters, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss future reporting.
Gentleman yielding. With that, we now recognize the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Thank you, Director Patel, for being here today. I have a couple of questions regarding a terrible shooting that occurred in Colorado, a state, as you may know, that I represent. You've testified previously about, I think, what you would describe as your efforts to provide more information regarding the investigation with respect to the horrific assassination of Mr. Kirk. And so, in that same vein, I'm hoping you can provide this committee and my constituents in Colorado with some clarity.
Absolutely.
I think, as my colleagues know, in Evergreen, Colorado, Jefferson County, a county that I proudly represent, at Evergreen High School, a shooter ultimately injured 2 students were praying for their swift recovery. There's an article here from Colorado Public Radio. The title is, quote, FBI was already investigating an account that may have been linked to the Evergreen shooter. You're familiar with the circumstances, generally, Director, regarding this terrible tragedy.
Yes.
So my understanding from the public reporting is that an organization reported to the FBI in July of this year regarding, just reading here from the article, that the FBI opened an assessment into a social media account user whose identity was unknown and who was discussing the planning of a mass shooting with threats nonspecific in nature. This is the FBI statement to the press. And that the FBI continued to work this assessment investigation to identify the name and location of the user up until September 10th, 2025, which was the day of the tragedy. Can you provide us some clarity on what were the impediments to finding, the account user, and maybe describe in greater detail the FBI's work in that regard?
Generally speaking, yes, because I know even though the shooter's deceased, the investigation we're not done.
Sure.
And so the impediments to finding these individuals, and you highlight a great point, we had 2 huge tragedies in the span of days in this country, the school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado being one of them. And proactively going out onto these social media platforms, which are so large, is our biggest impediment. And we need to rely on the service providers. There's actual legislation, I can't remember the name of it, that's up for renewal, which will, and I think at the end of the month, which gives service providers the ability to report that information in from their end without liability. We need that to continue, because while the FBI has so many people and the police are great at doing it, there's just too many platforms to cover down on.
Well, I appreciate that, Director Patel, and I think we're certainly, I'm interested in continuing this conversation, because I think the reporting suggests that there's a pattern, and that ultimately, we want to make sure that law enforcement is able to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening in the future. I have a question. It's not meant as a gotcha question, so it just frame it there. But it is in regards to some reporting around a periodic transaction report that you had filed earlier, this year. So this is in July, pursuant to the ethical obligations as a senior executive official. You remember filing that in July?
Yes.
Yeah, so in that report, as best as I can surmise, you disclosed that you divested $100,000 or more in a variety of different stocks, which I presume was pursuant to the ethics agreement that you negotiated with the Department of Justice. In that same report, there's a disclosure regarding purchases of 2 different rather two different transactions. So between $15,000 to $50,000 in a national coffee house chain and between $50,000 to $100,000 in a semiconductor company on May 9th and May 12th. Are those transactions that you're doing personally, or are these through a stockbroker, or are these transactions that you're handling yourself?
So how they happen is I submit proposals under DOJ guidance to say, hey, I would like to trade this or that. And they run their review, and the FBI runs a review, and then they come back and say yes or no, and then I make the transaction.
Is there a reason that you decided to make the purchases into those two companies?
Generally speaking, before I got this job, I was, trading stocks, but not a lot, like most people, and I just follow certain industries, and I thought they would be a good investment.
So the reason why I ask, right, because you had divested in other companies,
yeah.
And I presume that wasn't because there were actual conflicts. It's just that you wanted to avoid an appearance of impropriety.
It was both.
Both,
Yeah.
But not all of the companies were conflicts.
Whatever they make
divested from.
I don't make the call; they make the call.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess my point would be, the reason why I ask is, why I said it's not a gotcha question. I have for years led an effort here in Congress to try to ban members of Congress, senior executive officials, from trading stocks. And it's bipartisan in nature. We're working really hard to get that done, Republicans and Democrats. And you can understand, I think,
Sure.
given your role, given the nature of the position that you hold as the leader of the largest law enforcement agency in our country, that divesting entirely, not doing day trading now, I think would be something that would be in the interest of the American people. So I just would hope you would consider that, and that moving forward, that perhaps not purchasing stocks in individual companies, I would think would be something that would be worth pursuing.
Gentleman's time is...
I'm happy to give the witness an opportunity to...
Sure.
No, thank you. I'll work with you on it.
Gentleman from...
Neguse began by grounding the hearing in tragedy. He spoke about a school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado, where 2 students were injured, a community left shaken, and families still searching for answers. The congressman made clear that his questions were not theoretical. This was his district, these were his constituents, and the pain, he emphasized, is ongoing. Neguse referenced public reporting indicating that the FBI had been investigating a social media account linked to the shooter months before the attack. According to the FBI's own statement, the Bureau opened an assessment into an account that discussed planning a mass shooting, even if the threats were described as nonspecific. That assessment remained open until the day of the shooting itself. That is the moment where the hearing shifted from sympathy to scrutiny. Patel also referenced federal legislation that allows service providers to share threat-related information with law enforcement without legal liability. While he did not name the law, he made clear that its renewal is critical to the FBI's ability to act quickly in future cases. This is an important moment to pause and explain something viewers may not realize. FBI threat assessments are not criminal investigations. They are limited fact-finding efforts designed to determine whether a credible threat exists. They rely on digital breadcrumbs, IP addresses, account metadata, and cooperation from private companies. If a platform delays or cannot identify a user, the Bureau's ability to intervene is severely constrained. Neguse acknowledged the explanation, but signaled that the broader pattern remains troubling. Then the hearing took a sharp turn, but the congressman noted that Patel also disclosed new stock purchases during the same period. Those purchases included tens of thousands of dollars invested in a national coffee chain and up to $100,000 in a semiconductor company. Neguse was careful to frame the question deliberately. He emphasized that this was not a gotcha question. Instead, he asked how those transactions were executed and whether Patel personally made those decisions. Patel explained that all trades are reviewed in advance. He submits proposals under Department of Justice guidance, ethics officials review them, and the FBI conducts its own assessment. Only after receiving approval does he proceed with a transaction. That answer is significant because it reflects how ethics compliance actually works at the highest levels of government. Officials are not banned outright from trading stocks under current law. Instead, they must seek clearance to ensure no conflict exists. Neguse then asked the deeper question, why make those investments at all? Patel responded that before becoming FBI director, he had traded stocks casually and followed certain industries. He described the investments as personal financial decisions he believed would perform well, but Neguse was not done. Neguse argued that given Patel's role as director of the largest law enforcement agency in the country, fully divesting from individual stocks could better serve the public interest and avoid any perception of impropriety. This exchange reveals something critical about modern governance. The debate Neguse raised is not about whether Patel violated rules, but whether those rules are strong enough for positions with extraordinary power. Patel responded briefly, signaling a willingness to work with lawmakers on the issue before the chairman moved to conclude the exchange. If you want ongoing coverage that explains how ethics, power, and accountability intersect in Washington, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. So, what should viewers take away from this hearing? First, the FBI continues to face structural challenges in identifying online threats before violence occurs, especially when investigations depend on private platforms. Second, ethics rules allow senior officials to trade stocks with approval, but bipartisan momentum is building to change that standard. And third, moments like this hearing are less about partisan confrontation and more about defining what accountability should look like in an era of eroding trust. We will continue tracking both the evergreen investigation and the broader push to reform ethics laws at the highest levels of government. Subscribe to the channel so you stay informed as these issues develop.